Beethoven arrived in Vienna in November 1792, not quite 22 years old. Mozart had died 11 months earlier, and Haydn had just returned from his first superstar residency in London. Vienna was the place to be for a young musician like Beethoven, who was known as a promising composer, but a pianist of the first rank, with a phenomenal talent for improvisation, creating musical fantasies on the spot as he played. But his talent for real composition had barely been tapped at this young age. That would take more time, more study, more development. Beethoven, born in December of 1770 and raised in Bonn, Germany. His grandfather Ludwig was the local Kapellmeister, or music director, a powerful and influential man who died when Beethoven was only 3. Beethoven's father, Johann, also was a court musician, but fate seems to have skipped a generation in terms of real talent, since Johann was merely competent. He also became known as a heavy drinker and something of a local character. Not surprisingly, Johann tended to take out his own failures on his son, Ludwig, our guy, and was a strict, unyielding, and even cruel teacher, and was especially intolerant of young Ludwig's skill at improvisation. Parental jealousy, I imagine. Anyway, Beethoven's unhappy childhood tended to drive him inward, withdrawing from society into his own fantasy world. But fortunately, Beethoven impressed a number of important musicians and aristocrats in Bonn who would help pave the way for his introduction into Viennese musical life. Beethoven also became a student of the Enlightenment and immersed himself in history, theology, literature, science, and philosophy, especially the rather remote time and space philosophy of Immanuel Kant and the lofty idealism of the poet Friedrich Schiller. A pretty potent combination. And from an early age, we find that Beethoven was drawn to Schiller's popular Masonic poem known as Ode die Freude, Ode to Joy, which he filed away for possible future use. Beethoven had little problem attracting financial support from wealthy patrons in Vienna, but the main reason he was there was to study composition with the master, Franz Joseph Haydn, which he did for just over a year. It was a rather controversial, at times contentious relationship, and despite those who like to pile on Haydn and claim that Beethoven learned nothing from him, Haydn's influence on Beethoven was profound, especially, I feel, Haydn's great Symphony No. 102. Haydn's technique of motivic repetition to create drama and fortify the structure of the music surely impressed the young Beethoven. That's Haydn's Symphony 102, which is part of this series. Haydn definitely helped guide the young Beethoven in marshaling his creative powers into music of cohesion, invention, and architectural proportion. And then there's this. A most striking but subtle announcement to the musical world. Odd that the most titanic musical mind of the century avoided the grand, heaven-storming, dramatic gesture to impress his audience. Beethoven clearly felt he didn't need that, and wisely decided not to overdo it. But whatever his thinking, here it is again. The dawn of the new century, which fueled Beethoven's creative powers as he now shifted into high gear, producing piano sonatas, concerti, his first string quartets, his famous septet, and his first symphony, a form that every serious composer had to tackle. And it might be surprising to learn that there were very few established public concerts at this time in Vienna. Orchestras were still the property of the royalty. And even though this had started to change, a composer still had to organize and fund his own concerts in order to hear his large-scale works. These concerts were called academies. Mozart did them often. It's astounding to think that the greatest symphonic and choral masterworks of all time were only heard by audiences because the composer himself went out and raised the money, including the premiere of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony in 1824. Yeah, that one, yes. So generous support of wealthy patrons was essential. And in that regard, Beethoven was well served and well connected. But he still had to sell tickets out of his apartment for his own first big Academy concert, which took place on Wednesday, April 2nd, 1800, his real coming out into society. And since these events showcased a composer's new output but could only be produced occasionally, they were usually very long concerts, jammed full of as yet unheard music. So the final offering in this big concert was Beethoven's new First Symphony, maybe a bit cautious in its musical idiom, maybe not. Still, Beethoven honors tradition by opening the symphony with a slow introduction, as did Haydn. But to announce yourself to the musical world in such an understated, almost offhand way was remarkable, so unconventional, even a bit revolutionary. The audacity of those two chords is, I think, the first of many such features that we will encounter in Beethoven's symphonies. Since when does a work begin with an unresolved chord? A dominant chord, we call it dominant seventh, because of this interval is 7 notes apart, and the dominant chord must lead to the tonic, or the home key. It's that old polarity thing that must resolve. Dominant, tonic. And you always start with your tonic, your home key chord, not the unresolved dominant. When I demonstrated this with Rossini, that chord, you certainly can't end with it, and you can't start out of the blue with it either, certainly not in 1800. Yet, there it is. And with total confidence, Beethoven continues now with 2 more similar cadences. This one shifting to the minor key, and the third of them now, like so, leading to this. Aha, and we finally got our bearings, and we've arrived emphatically now in G major. Ta-da! There's only one problem, and that's the symphony is based in C major. G is the dominant, the polar key, and it must resolve G to C. Okay, so Beethoven now writes a lovely lyrical melody to bring us out of G and into C major. And G is here. And the music crescendos and expands into this. Stately, majestic chords. Now it pulls back just a bit and moves into the minor. But then it crescendos and reaffirms glorious C major. And still with G in the bass. Here's an ascending scale, which now quickly returns downward. And presto, or allegro con brio, our exposition begins. And so this magnificently structured introduction, which began with such ambivalence and then hovered around C major, has finally settled into that key for the exposition. And Beethoven, child of the Enlightenment and the classical style, would create a first symphony roughly equivalent to late Mozart and Haydn in its overall proportions, its style, and architecture, moving on now to its textbook exposition. And already, Beethoven is using that Haydnesque technique of taking tiny motifs or cells and using them to build his structure. So in the first theme of this exposition, he takes 3 notes. G, the dominant, the B is the leading tone, which result to C, the tonic, bum, 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 and a snappy rhythm to provide energy. And then upward C major triad now, here, with the leading tone, bum, bum, prominent. We move then into D minor, and the same thing repeats, but up a step, which now prepares us for a big, emphatic, extended C major episode. So what I'd like to do now is to play for you all of the main themes of the exposition, and then we'll hear them as they occur in the orchestra. First, the main theme in C major. It repeats in D minor, and then leads us back to C major with these dynamic chords, clearly related to those big, majestic chords from the introduction. Then the next theme of this group built on a C major triad and a descending scale, like so. Then a transition using the main theme, leading to the key of G major, the all-important dominant or polar key, and another theme also with a descending scale. A connecting theme. Now the secondary group of themes, all in the dominant key of G major, and as required by the sonata form, more lyrical in character, featuring now the woodwinds, like so. And notice, this theme is also built on a descending scale. These scales are everywhere, here, and even the main theme. Plus, there's more. This graceful secondary theme is accompanied by the ascending triad figure we heard from the main theme, which now becomes this in the bassoon. So we have that accompaniment with the lyrical secondary theme, like so. And you see how all these materials are bound together. They're related motivically in a subtle but organic sort of way. This is true symphonic writing. And this leads to the third major theme, also in G major. It's very energetic, almost boisterous in its precise, clipped rhythms. It's tough to do on the piano, but wait till you hear the strings play it. It is a brilliant, dashing theme. Now we have a minor key variant of the secondary theme, this one, like so, in the cellos and basses. And it continues to wind its way back to G major to close out the exposition with a vigorous return of the main theme. Or a variation of it. And Beethoven now takes the rising triad, this thing, and inverts it using these chromatic diminished chord harmonies. Yes, for some extra added tension, leading back to G major for a brief and genteel closing. And the exposition ends emphatically in G major. So many amazing things bursting forth from Beethoven's mind. So here now is the exposition, beginning after the slow introduction, and I'll call out everything as it happens. Our main theme. It repeats in D minor. Now, a transition. Here are those dynamic chords. And a new theme with a downward scale. The main theme now has a transition. And a connecting theme. Ba-da-ba-ba-bum also has a descending scale. And our secondary theme. We're now in G major. And the ascending triad as accompaniment. And here is our third theme, bursting with energy. And here is the minor key version of the second theme, with an oboe obbligato. And the theme continues to wind its way in the cellos and basses. The main theme now. And the diminished chords, very intense. And a gentle closing in the dominant key of G major. And it will all repeat. It was standard practice to repeat the entire exposition so that the audience could hear all of the main materials again before plunging into the central development section, where Beethoven uses a device that's very common with composers, many of whom struggled with the process of true symphonic writing. It's taking a theme from the exposition. Say, take our main theme. And many composers in the coming years would fall back on this device because it's all they knew how to do. Simply repeat the theme in different keys and with different accompaniments. So this might become this. Or maybe this. Etc. And you just kind of go around the block several times in different keys. Now, Beethoven will do more than this in his development section, but still, he's basically relied on this device, as you will hear. By comparison, the first movement development of Haydn's Symphony 102 that we examined was much more inventive than this. But Beethoven was just starting out here, still finding himself at age 29. So never fear, things would begin to change in his next symphony. So here is Beethoven's central development section as it occurs, and I'll call out the events as they happen. Here's the main theme. It's repeated now in sequences. Here it's in D major, now in G major, and leading to a shadowy C minor. And there's the ascending triads. The triads continue through various harmonic regions. And here's that connecting theme, now in E flat major, with its downward scale. Now the main theme is passed around in the woodwinds and the low strings. It's a sequence now in F minor. Now we're in G minor. And now the main theme in a new version. And this woodwind phrase, it's taken from the slow introduction. We're in the key of A minor, and we cadence now in a big unison E. And now the outline of the dominant chord. And our recapitulation in the full orchestra. And there's our recapitulation. And Beethoven sticks to the classical playbook, essentially repeats everything in order from the exposition. But now we stay in the home key of C major, etc., instead of, and not in G major as it was in the exposition, etc. And just as in Mozart and Haydn, the symphonies that we've examined, the structure, the architecture of this movement is flawlessly shaped and balanced. And it's also clear. We recognize the themes from the exposition as they occur in the development section, then in the recap. But now there's a brief coda, which starts with a simple sequential treatment of the main theme, like so, leading to F major, and then leading to D major, and now finally to C major. Aha! And those dynamic chords that we heard early in the exposition to get things really going, they now return in the coda, but now they have a new harmonic progression and a sort of dislocated rhythm between treble and bass, like so. Which adds that extra burst of energy as the main theme now will propel us through to the end. And you'll hear the grand, sustained expanse of C major hovering throughout the entire orchestra with the main theme chugging away underneath and the rising triad everywhere. And this is so similar to the end of the Mozart Symphony 34 first movement that we've explored. And I didn't plan it this way, but the carry-through of the Mozartean model in its design, its spirit, and its sound is remarkable. Here's the coda now to the first movement. The second movement is the traditional slow movement of the symphony, and it's written in a sort of gallant rococo style, the pleasant, easy listening that was preferred by the nobility of the classical era. No need for Beethoven to go against the grain too much at this point in his career. The second movement is an andante. It moves along in a rather genteel, breezy, rather brisk way in this performance, you'll hear. It's in a moderate triple meter with 3 beats to the measure, and it's in the key of F major, which is now the tonic, the main key of this movement. And you'll hear the first theme start unaccompanied in the second violins, and then you'll hear the violas and celli enter like so. And did you hear what Beethoven did there? The second violin started with the theme in the tonic key, the key of F major, unaccompanied. Then the violas and celli entered in C major, which is the dominant key. As the violins went on to play against them. Then there was a brief link, and we returned to F major as the violins and woodwinds took up the melody. If this sounds familiar, it should. It's the exact same format that we saw in the fugue that we discussed in Dvorak. But Beethoven's second movement is not a fugue, but he uses the standard fugal technique to introduce his main theme. Here it is again, and I'll call it out. The theme alone in the second violins. Now the violas and cellos enter in the dominant key of C with the theme. Here's a brief transition. And now the theme in F major, the tonic key with the full orchestra. But now, as things progress, we notice more interesting features. The theme you've just heard cadences in C major. That's the dominant key of F. And a new theme is heard now, also very graceful and charming, and also in C major. And this leads to a bridge passage, which sounds like a little military fanfare. And finally, another theme in C major, very delicate, with the timpani, the kettle drums, used in a very unusual way to delineate the rhythm in the violin and flute. The bum, ba-bum, ba-bum, ba-bum. And the first section of the movement closes in the dominant key of C. Sounds to me exactly like the exposition of a sonata. And that's what this second movement is. The first theme, in the tonic key of F major, but here fancied up a bit as a fugato, a little fugue. A move to the dominant key of C major, where we heard the second group of themes, 3 of them, including that little military thing. And we close the section in the key of C, exactly as in the standard sonata exposition. But something else really fascinating is happening here. That second theme, the graceful one, this one, is built on a 2-note motive. 1, 2, 1, 2, which is the same prominent motive from the main theme. Again, a motivic cohesion or unity here. And as we now continue into what must be a central development section, Beethoven uses that little 2-note motive, ba-dum, ba-dum, to seamlessly move us into the remote key of D flat major, like so. And that timpani rhythm that we heard a while ago, bum, ba, bum, ba, bum, now takes over the entire orchestra. And these 2 motives, the little 2-note motive and that clipped timpani rhythm, bum, ba, bum, ba, bum, they are it. The entire development section consists of just these 2 things. And hear how he compressed the 2-note motive. And the music moved back to the tonic key of F major. And the recapitulation is upon us. I should also point out that that timpani rhythm motive, bum, ba, bum, ba, bum, ba, bum, is based on the 3rd measure of the main theme. Yes, that rhythm. And you heard it prominently there as we were arriving back in F major. And the recapitulation now is essentially the exposition repeated, but we stay in the tonic key of F major. But notice how Beethoven is now writing in a true symphonic way by using those 2 little motives. The first 2 notes, and the timpani rhythm. Bum, ba, bum, bum. He uses these 2 seemingly insignificant little trifles to build the entire movement, brick by brick, as it were. This is very significant. Beethoven using this complex method he inherited from Haydn to construct this deceptively simple Rococo-ish diversion. Beethoven may have been playing it safe to a degree in this work, but he was acquiring total control of his music and his destiny as a composer. Next, in the number 3 spot, as we know, is the minuet movement. But already in his first symphony, Beethoven does something way outside the box. It's as if he says, this minuet thing is getting pretty old. It is, after all, a new century. So he labels the 3rd movement as a minuet, but he actually writes what has to be regarded as the first ever symphonic scherzo, a relatively new genre largely pioneered by, guess who? Haydn, which Beethoven had also been using in his piano sonatas and chamber music. Scherzo is the Italian word for joke, and it's usually light and playful music, often dance-like, since it will now take the place of the minuet as something of a time-out in the symphonic plan. The scherzo is often designed like a minuet with a central contrasting trio section, but the character is definitely less formal and less old world than the minuet. Actually, in his piano sonata, Opus 31, number 3, Beethoven would include both a scherzo and a minuet. So Beethoven's 3rd movement, which he calls a minuet, is a whirlwind of motion and excitement, and it's built on a rising scale. And it begins in C major, but immediately within 4 very quick measures, it moves into the dominant key of G major, like so. And it's much faster than that, as you will hear. And in the next 4 measures, it climbs even higher and reasserts G major. So here it is now, the opening of this most unusual New Age minuet. And what in the world had just happened there? You hear this abrupt change from C major to G major in the opening. Okay, but after that, the lightning-fast harmonic shifts, and the misplaced rhythms, and that sudden burst of volume, they destabilize the music, the harmony, the rhythm, the dynamics. So let's slow it down a bit and just examine what the man is doing here. Beethoven starts this second section in the dominant key of G major, here, yes? And he uses this chromatic note just a half step above G, A flat, which has something of a wailing effect, and it moves us into this, which repeats. But notice the agitated rhythm here. Then he compresses the phrase, and he magically ends up in a totally new key. We've been thrust now into the key of D flat major, which on the keyboard is only a half step above C major, the shortest distance you can move physically on the keyboard. But D flat is about as far away as you could get from C in the traditional ways of moving from one key to another in music, or modulating as we call it. But there's nothing traditional going on here, and Beethoven is able to sequentially, by repeating and rather mysteriously, take us from D flat major, as you will hear, and it's very graceful at this moment. I'll play it slowly. And amazingly back into C major, and a rather thunderous recap of the opening, complete with its rising scale theme. So let's now back up. I want you to hear all of this. We're in D flat major. And here goes. And what was that about? This thing. Did you catch that? It's like this wailing chromatic thing we heard a while back. Beethoven now uses this bizarre harmonic device that we refer to as a Neapolitan chord. Don't ask me why. But you take the basic major triad, C, you move it up a half step, again, D flat. So you have, and then it resolves like so. So together you have. Then he follows it with a standard non-Neapolitan progression. And he quickly alternates them. Then he really throws us a curve by accenting the second note on each measure. But at Beethoven's rapid tempo, it is so disorienting. But now we get back to C major for our closing of this section, but the rhythm of the melody does this. It's missing the strong beat on every downbeat, in every measure. The accompaniment is there. The accompaniment is very regular. 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Put them together, the melody is doing this. It's just, I can barely keep up with this. And it's amazing, all these jarring, irregular elements. Melody, harmony, rhythm, the breakneck speed at which they all happen. They're disruptive, they're disorienting, almost chaotic. Yet Beethoven organizes it all with supreme skill and architectural logic. This is just a totally new way of writing music, which requires a new way of listening. It was impossible in 1800 for the human ear to follow and make sense of this lightning-quick, volatile music. Here it is again. Haydn had written some very fast minuets in his string quartets, but nothing like this. And as an actual minuet to be danced, you'd have a major collapse on the palace ballroom floor, I think. I hate when that happens. But the architecture of this so-called minuet is very proper. There's the standard central trio section in which the music suddenly stabilizes and the harmony becomes almost static. I think any audience could follow that. But you'll notice that each of these simple phrases is answered by the violins, lightly, darting about between the wind chords. And you heard that little hitch in the rhythm with the violins. A type of rhythmic syncopation, which we'll deal with in the finale. But we do stay comfortably in C major for this trio, including a big build-up on that same major triad and rhythm, with the instruments gradually adding in like a very quick Mannheim crescendo, which we discussed in Mozart. And this leads to a literal repeat of this crazy minuet proper, as was the custom. So why did Beethoven call this a minuet when he was actually rocking the musical world with the first ever symphonic scherzo? No one knows. It's just one of those things. In any case, here is the entire third movement, the world's fastest minuet, and I'll call it out as we go. We start in C major and rise to G major. Now, new key, new rhythm, new dynamics. All very disorienting in 1800. Now moving to D flat major. And for a moment, it's very sweet. Now it begins to rise chromatically, very mysterioso. And it's back in C major. And here's those Neapolitan harmonies. Hang on. Where's the downbeat here? In the violins. And now we'll repeat. We move into D flat major again. Now it's rising. An astounding harmonic progression here. Back to C major. It's extended now those Neapolitan harmonies. Where's the downbeat in the violins? Oh, who cares? Just enjoy it. Now the trio, the woodwinds, and the whirlwind violins. At least there's some stability here, huh? Harmony, phrases. Here's that little hitch in the violins. It repeats. Violins, woodwinds, violins. Here it is again. Now on the dominant chord in the violins, we sort of fragment. The violins take over, and here's that quick Mannheim crescendo. We repeat. The violins begin again. Here's that big crescendo into C major. And the rhythm again. Now we repeat the scherzo from the top. And the finale, the fourth movement, begins with this very commanding sound. A unison G. From the full orchestra, every available instrument is playing G. You can't miss it. No doubt about it. It's G. So we can safely assume that G is the tonic key of the finale, right? I mean, it's so emphatic. It might continue like this, like you'll hear in the beginning of the Second Symphony. But no, the First Symphony is supposed to be in C major. So G is the dominant, the polar key that will lead to C major. So again, something funny is going on here. And this finale also begins with a slow introduction, another total rarity in symphonic music at the time, to begin the finale with a slow intro. So we're focused on this note G, and from it emerges three rising notes in the first violins, very timid. So problem solved. We are in G major, right? Curtain. No. Well, Beethoven now repeats the three notes, and he adds one more, which subtly shifts our sense of tonality. Are we in G or C? And the rhythm of this pattern now changes as another note is added. Oh yes, so we must be in G, right? Now another new rhythm and another note added on the top. No, we're in C, must be. Then another scale with this note added on top. And our sense of tonal balance now shifts, since this new note produces a very familiar sound. This chord, it's a dominant seventh chord. It's a seventh because, as we saw, the top note and the bottom notes form the interval of a seventh, 7 notes apart. And it's dominant because, like that very first odd chord in the very beginning of the symphony, it must resolve. And your ear tells you where? To C major, the tonic key of the symphony. So Beethoven extends his little 3-note motive upward, keeping us in suspense before resolving into C major. And could this ascending scale starting on G be related to the whirlwind minuet theme from the third movement? It could be. That's how real symphonic music is put together. And speaking of this, Beethoven is now putting together, he's assembling note by note the main theme of the finale with this ascending scale. He's not just goofing around here. He adds one more note to the top here, which now becomes a fleeting upward scale to set our allegro molto e vivace off and running. It's a joyous, brilliant allegro, which soon moves into the dominant key of G major with this transitional theme in the cello and basses, which is in fact taken from the bass line that accompanies this charming motive that you just heard. There it is. Bum, 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 bum. Now the transitional theme is this. And it introduces us to our secondary theme, which is in the dominant key of G. And a bit of harmonic tension with these diminished chords, leading to this. Back to G major. And a closing motive now, which I must tell you about. Here is Beethoven's closer in its basic rhythmic outline. That's the basic rhythmic structure of this closing theme, but that's not what Beethoven writes, since he wants a closer to have some special rhythmic energy and buoyancy. So instead of writing that, he uses what we refer to as a rhythmic syncopation and writes something far more jazzy. Syncopation is basically shifting the rhythmic values in the measures around. In this case, it's taking the first note, followed by two short notes in that, and you make the first note shorter and you transfer part of its length to the second note, and it sounds very complex, but we hear it every day in music. And syncopation always adds a special kick. Yeah, as opposed to the straight version, which would be, yes, which most any other composer could have done. And here it is now, the exposition of the finale, Allegro molto e vivace. In the central section of this finale, which must be a sonata-style development, you will hear the ascending scales from the main theme, often inverted so that they now descend. And sometimes they're combined with the syncopated theme. And then that transitional theme from the exposition, which was in the cellian bass, that one which is now flirting with the minor key. And the ascending scales, which Beethoven had so carefully assembled for us, note by note in the opening, they are now going full throttle in the strings. And the music settles on this huge dominant chord on G and just grinds away. Listen how it all dissolves now into the recapitulation. And the main materials are recapitulated pretty much as we've heard them in the exposition, except as expected, they all stay in the tonic key of C major. And you'll hear how Beethoven now switches over to pure harmony and rhythm with these rising chords. And coming to rest on this massive dominant chord on G. Again, a major structural point. And listen to what happens coming out. For me, the high point of this entire symphony is the coda to the finale, where the surging energy of the music cools down a bit, and Beethoven introduces a new motive, played by oboes and horns, and it sounds like a quaint, gallant-style fanfare. Which continues using this very standard progression. And it's very odd, very touching in a way, how the music changes at this point with this whimsical, old-world 18th century fanfare. Just as the symphony is about to end, it's as if Beethoven is bidding farewell to the courtly elegance of the 18th century with that familiar sound of oboes and horns. But there's one more fascinating thing that happens here that ties it all together. Those ascending scales that grew out of the introduction and became this, which Beethoven frequently inverted as the music progressed, they now return as the mini fanfare repeats. And these scales are everywhere. They're darting about, cascading in the flutes and clarinets, delicate and fleeting. Sometimes they ascend, some descend. Everywhere you turn, the scales increase and multiply. It all happens very quickly, and they sweep us into a full, triumphant C major close. And there is the first of Beethoven's big signature symphonic wrap-ups, those emphatic tonic C major chords, which confirm beyond a doubt that a new dynamic musical force has arrived in Vienna. And how many people in that Academy concert audience on April 2nd, 1800, sensed the significance of the event, that symphonic music was about to change in ways they never could have imagined? I'm Lawrence Rapchak. Thank you very much for listening. Here now is the entire finale to Beethoven